الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن سار على سبيله إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So today inshallah ta'ala we'll continue with our lesson in studying the book At-Timithi fi Ulum al-Hadith by Ibn Malakin rahimahullah. And in the last lesson that we had, that we're discussing the point that he mentioned concerning Hadith al-Mu'dal. Hadith al-Mu'dal. What we discussed concerning al-Hadith al-Mu'dal is when there's a saqt in the isnad, in the center of the isnad, where several people are missing. Then today inshallah ta'ala we'll then go to the next discussion that he mentioned, the next type of hadith, that he discussed different anwa, different types of hadith, and the next type that he discussed concerning al-mu'allaka. So hadith al-mu'allaka, and the author rahimullah, that he discussed concerning hadith al-mu'allaka huwa ma hudifa min mubtadi al-isnadihi wahidun fa-akthar. So the author rahimahullah, Ibn Malakin, that he mentioned concerning the next type of hadith to be discussed is matters that relates to hadith al-mu'allaka. And he mentioned that the definition of this is huwa ma hudifa min mubtadi isnadi, from what have been removed, or what have been the hadith that from the beginning of the hadith, that there are those that are missing one person or more. So with this inshallah we discuss several masahil that relates to hadith al-mu'allaka, as we mentioned, that the author rahimahullah in most part he only mentioned the hadith, mentioned the type of hadith and also the definition without discussing any further matters pertaining to that particular no. So as for what will be added concerning hadith al-mu'allaka, we'll be discussing concerning tarif, its definition linguistically and istilahan. Also we discuss concerning surah, the different types of surah of hadith al-mu'allaka, also an anwa, and also we discuss concerning the hukum of hadith al-mu'allaka. Also we discuss concerning Madhan, the place that you might find hadith al-mu'allaka, and also in specific a hadith al-mu'allaka that is found in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. And then last we'll discuss concerning hadith al-mu'allaka, concerning books on that particular topic. So with wabillahi tawfiq, we say concerning hadith al-mu'allaq, that one regarding its definition. So the author rahimahullah as mentioned that hadith al-mu'allaka, that ulama mentioned concerning its definition linguistically, as they mentioned that hadith al-mu'allaka is concerning allaka shay bi shay, where something that it is fixed to something from the roof, and it doesn't per se touch the bottom, it doesn't go straight to the bottom. So something which is hanging from the roof, from something which is above, and it doesn't per se reach the bottom, that is hadith mu'allaka linguistically. So regarding concerning what is meant concerning the definition of hadith al-mu'allaka, hadith mu'allaka by way of istilahan, hadith mu'allaka, that they mentioned concerning hadith al-mu'allaka, that they mentioned here, that as the author mentioned concerning huwa ma hudifa, is what, where narrators are missing from the beginning point of the hadith one person or more. ما حذف من مبتدأ إسنادي راو واحد فأكثر. So the definition of mu'allaka in the ulama is where from the point of the collector of the hadith, the one who's the collector of the hadith, that he have dropped one or more narrators. And so that's concerning hadith al-mu'allaka, where missing from point of the collector one or more narrators. So that's concerning the definition of hadith al-mu'allaka. So the next matter regarding concerning, so we mentioned concerning from the mubtadi' isnad, from concerning to the hadith that have a start and have an end. The starting point of the hadith, they said the ibtida' al-isnad is by way of the one who said to be the author or the collector of that hadith or that book. So the one who's authoring that book, he said to be the start of the isnad. So he's the mubtadi of the isnad. So for example, Bukhari, he will be the start of the hadith, and the end of the hadith, the next end will be at the sahabi. So the Sahabi is said to be Akhir Isnad. So the Sahabi is said to be the last point on the Isnad. And the first point, the first narrator on Isnad, the first point will be by way of the collector, the one who's authoring of that book. So Bukhari will be the first point of the hadith. Muslim, Abu Dawood, they will be the one to said to be the Mubtadi al-Isnad, one who's at the beginning of the Isnad. So the matter that we discussed concerning that, so I mentioned that there could be one or more individual missing. So by way of the author, in explaining further the definition, so by way of the author, for example, Imam Bukhari or Imam Abu Dawood, that they have not mentioned either one person, their sheikh, or more than one person. So they have skipped one or more people and jumped to the other person, and they mentioned the hadith from there onwards till the end. So that's kind of hadith that is said to be hadith al-mu'allaka. And generally considered mu'allaka is where those people who are missing, they're on tawali. They're one immediately after the others. So one immediately after another. So one or two or three individual are missing, but all of them are in that sequence simultaneously. So that's concerning hadith al-mu'allaka regarding the definition. As for those masahil that relates to hadith al-mu'allaka, and the next matter concerning is surah, the different type of ways that hadith al-mu'allaka may occur. Of those hadith al-mu'allaka that may occur is regarding concerning that the surah of mu'allaka is point of is by way of, as the ulama mentioned, that one, the author may drop all the narrators and go straight to the sahabi. For example, Imam Bukhari rahimahullah قال Abu Hurairah ta'ala anhu al-Hadith. So he dropped all the narrators and went straight to Abu Hurairah. So that is said to be hadith al-mu'allaka, because all those people between the author, the collector, up until Abu Hurairah, the sahabi, they're all missing. So that's said to be mu'allaka. So the entire isnad is most of the isnad is missing except for the sahabi, by way of the author. So that's concerning one way. Another method concerning hadith al-mu'allaka is concerning a person have dropped all the individual except to the tabi'i. So he started to concern that the tabi'in in this hadith is mentioned, and then the sahaba. The tabi'i is mentioned, then the sahaba. After that, so that's concerning of an example regarding where the tabi'i is mentioned and the sahabi, and then the hadith. Then that's another way concerning hadith al-mu'allaka. So it comes out example concerning An-Nafi' and Ibn Umar. So he mentioned concerning An-Nafi', Bukhari mentioned An-Nafi' and Ibn Umar al-Hadith. So that's concerning that everyone is missing except for Nafi' and Ibn Umar. By way of the author, that's another way concerning hadith al-mu'allaka. Also, he may mention concerning immediate to him concerning only a sheikh or a sheikhuhu. So he could either mention concerning missing in the isnad is that he dropped his sheikh and went to the person with the sheikh of his sheikh. Or it could be he missed his sheikh and also the sheikh of his sheikh. So that's concerning different ways concerning hadith al-mu'allaka. Ways where the sahabi is the only one mentioned, or from by way of the tabi'in and the sahabi, or by way of others before them. So that's concerning hadith al-mu'allaka, and it occurs in those different formats. So that's concerning with hadith al-mu'allaka. We mentioned different types, different ways that it can occur in an isnad. As for the next matter regarding hadith al-mu'allaka is the hukum hadith al-mu'allaka. What's the hukum regarding hadith al-mu'allaka? With hadith al-mu'allaka, or hadith al-mu'allaq, that you'll find that the ulama, that it is said to be hadith, with a general ruling concerning hadith mu'allaka, is said to is classed as those hadith which is said to be weak. Of those hadith that are said to be hadith da'if. And the reason why it is stated or ruled as da'if is because there's individual in the isnad that are missing and they are unknown. So the jahala of those people who are missing, unknown individuals that are not mentioned. So based upon this, the hadith is said to be weak. Based upon that, ignorance of the hal, the affairs of those that are missing, that are not mentioned. So the hadith is said to be weak based upon that their individual who are not unknown in the hadith or in the isnad. Individuals, narrators who are unknown in the isnad. So based upon this, then the hadith is ruled as da'if. So they mention, and this is by the hadith missing one of the conditions of hadith, which is concerning that ittisal sanad, and also knowing concerning the hal of the arrawi. So based upon this, the hadith is said to be da'if. So overall, hadith al-mu'allaqa is hadith which is said to be da'if based upon what we have just mentioned. The next matter regarding hadith al-mu'allaqa, that we meant the hukum also, with the hukum concerning hadith al-mu'allaqa, that we mentioned in the next matter, is regarding concerning madhan, where some of the sources are placed that we can find hadith al-mu'allaqa, where some of the sources are places in the books of hadith that you might find hadith of this type. Of those books that you mentioned, that find that kutub al-hadith, such as Sahih Bukhari, it is mentioned regarding Sahih Muslim, and also Abu Dawood and others, that you do find hadith mu'allaqa in some of the books of hadith. So you will find in the books of hadith of this nature, but no per se book of hadith written specifically on that topic regarding the person's intention is collect hadith on that is said to be mu'allaqa. There's no so particular book, but you'll find them hadith mu'allaqa in some of the books of hadith. You'll find them in the renowned books of hadith, as we mentioned, Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawood, and the likes. So with that being the case concerning, as we mentioned, that of some of the sources or place books that we can find hadith al-mu'allaqa, we mentioned Bukhari and Muslim. And as we have stated before, and what is known, that Bukhari and Muslim rahimahullah, that in their collection of hadith, that they put a condition that everything mentioned in their book is authentic. So if that was a criteria that they made regarding their book, that whatever that we have put in our book, that it is authentic, then how can we say, or it can be said, that in their book is hadith which is mu'allaqa? And their criteria is that their hadith supposed to be all authentic. And mu'allaqa is a type of hadith that indicate there's a weakness in the hadith. So is there any contradiction, or what's the explanation regarding hadith mu'allaqa being found in Bukhari and Muslim in particular, seeing that they stipulate and meet the criteria that whatever they collect is authentic? Something to clarify regarding Bukhari. First, we start concerning Sahih Muslim. Based upon that, there's about 14, or in reality, we'll mention about 12. Some mention 14, some mention 13, and some mention 12 hadith that are said to be mu'allaqa in Sahih Muslim. So we're starting first with Sahih Muslim. So Imam Muslim rahimahullah, it is stated that some of the ulama mentioned that he stated over, just they said 14, but in reality that there are 12 hadiths that are said to be mu'allaqa in Sahih Muslim. And some of those hadiths were repeated, that those who mentioned 14. So based upon this, the ulama mentioned that these hadiths that are said to be mu'allaqa in Sahih Muslim, that the majority of those hadiths are found in Sahih Muslim, in another mention in Muslim, mentioned Sahih Muslim, mu'allaqa, but then again mentioned with its complete chain. So within the same book as Sahih Muslim, you'll find the same hadith with the complete chain. So that can somewhat, I don't mention, can somewhat clarify regarding those mu'allaqa in Sahih Muslim, that they are mentioned within that book, in most part, another place in the book with a complete chain. So that's kind of somewhat clarify regarding the situation of Sahih Muslim, except for one hadith, where they mention concerning that particular hadith in Sahih Muslim, that it is mentioned, but it is not mentioned elsewhere in Sahih Muslim with a complete chain. And that hadith is found elsewhere in Sahih Bukhari. So that one hadith that is not mentioned elsewhere in Sahih Muslim with a complete chain, it is found in Sahih Bukhari with a complete chain. So from this, it kind of somewhat clarify regarding the situation regarding Sahih Muslim, that all the hadiths that are mentioned in Sahih Muslim that are said to be mu'allaqa, that reality, that's not the case. As they are mentioned elsewhere in Sahih Muslim with a complete chain, except for one hadith that is mentioned in other books, amongst them Bukhari, with a complete chain. So that can somewhat clarify the situation regarding Imam Muslim and his book, As-Sahih. The second matter is regarding the hadith that are found in Sahih Bukhari. And what's the situation, or what is mentioned regarding those ahadith that are said to be in Sahih Bukhari, that are said to be mu'allaqa. Imam Bukhari rahimullah had a different approach regarding his book. There's a book that is rich concerning fiqh and also repeating of hadith. So Imam Bukhari rahimullah, that and also tabwibat regarding different chapter heading that he used as a part of his fiqh, that Imam Bukhari rahimullah, that they mentioned that in Sahih Bukhari you have many hadiths are mentioned mu'allaka, and athar are mentioned in this fashion of being mu'allaka. But I mentioned concern as for the hadith, so most of those hadiths wal athar that I mentioned in Sahih Bukhari mu'allaka is due to one, that repetition that is carried out in Sahih Bukhari in many places, that he repeats one hadith many places, and also that Bukhari rahimahullah also he used some of these hadith athar mu'allaka by way of tabwibat, and mentions the aqwal of the Sahaba regarding their position on certain matters. But as for hadith and nabawiyah, going back to the Prophet ﷺ regarding mu'allakat, that I mentioned that in most part in Sahih Bukhari, they are mentioned elsewhere with a complete chain. So most of the hadith, going back to the Prophet ﷺ that are mentioned in Sahih Bukhari, they are mentioned elsewhere in the book, muttasilan, with a complete chain. So at times, he may mention them by way of ikhtisar, trying to condense and to make the hadith, to summarize the hadith, that he might drop some of the narrators, but elsewhere in another place he might mention that same hadith with a complete chain. So at times the hadith is mentioned with a complete chain, and at times it will be mentioned with a chain which is mu'allaka, incomplete or broken. So and that's most part in Sahih Bukhari, but they still a set of hadith that are mentioned that are not found elsewhere in Sahih Bukhari, that are said to be mu'allaka. But these hadith are also, again, in most part, those hadith can be found in other places with a chain which is muttasil, in other books of hadith. So those ones that are in Bukhari that are not mentioned within Bukhari with a complete chain, they can be found elsewhere with a complete chain. So that kind of sounds so. So that's concerning Sahih Bukhari. And also they mention regarding concerning hadith mu'allaka in Sahih Bukhari, the ulama also they mentioned that with Sahih Bukhari, they mentioned that there's two matters to take into consideration regarding looking at the hadiths that are mentioned in Sahih Bukhari, in particular, that are said to be mu'allaka. Those hadiths that are mentioned in Sahih Bukhari that are said to be mu'allaka, that one should consider, look at them from having two approach. The first approach are those hadiths that are mu'allaka in Sahih Bukhari that are mentioned with sigat al-jazm, mentioned by the wording of jazm in a more certain way. Sigat al-jazm meaning that is mentioned as sigda, but for example, a narrator saying qal or rawa or dhakar or haka. So when these wordings are used in the hadith, then it shows concern that the hadith, they're said to be jazm. Is mentioned in a way of certainty, with some conviction. So when this wording of concerning of sigat al-jazm is used, then that's an indication that the hadith, they mentioned that with this indication the hadith, it is authentic up until the point of the person that is mentioned. So sigat al-jazm in Sahih Bukhari, when it is used, the hadith is considered or taken to be authentic up until the point of the persons who are mentioned. So if you mention a Sahabi, then that's it. Mention the Tabi'i, then you look at concerning, is that Tabi'i credible? As we know, concerning the Sahaba, they are not go on the concerning being check concerning their credibility, as all the Sahaba are said to be credible. But if I so, the general thing is concerning that whoever is mentioned in the isnad mu'allaka, then they are the ones to be looked into. As for the ones that are not mentioned, then it is taken that they are credible, if mentioned with sigat al-jazm. That's concerning of some of the view taken by some of the approach of some of the ulama. And the second approach is regarding if the hadith, even though concerning sigat al-jazm, that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah also mentioned that at times when hadith, at times that the hadith that are mentioned with sigat with the wording of jazm, qal, rawa, haka, dhakara, with this in this form, in this with these type of wording, that the hadith at times could be sahih, some of those hadith could be hasan, and at times some of those hadith could be of a slight weakness in them. The hadith could be daif, but the weakness is concerned to be inqita yasir fi sanad. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, so it is not where all that, so that's concerning Ibn Hajar rahimahullah putting things into some context. There are times there's a hadith of Sigat al-Jazm, in most part they are authentic or hasan, but you might find some that are weak with slight weakness. That's concerning the first approach regarding Sigat al-Jazm. The second approach concerns those hadiths that are in Bukhari that I mentioned with Sigat al-Tamrid. Sigat al-Tamrid, that is a way. Sigat al-Tamrid, the ulama of hadith, they mean concerning a hadith is mentioned by saying qeel, or the person said ruwiya, or dhukira, or hukiya. So this concerning in this manner, if the hadith is mentioned in this manner, then it means that that hadith is a sign that there's some type of slight weakness in the hadith. So this hadith is to be investigated and to be looked into. So if you see the word hukiya, dhukira, ruwiya, qeel, then those hadith to be looked into more and give the ruling which is appropriate to it, and give the ruling that is appropriate to them. So that's concerning, which at times those hadith could be sahih, and at times Sigat al-Tamrid, the hadith could be ruled to be hasan, or at times could be ruled to be daif, but that is after studying the hadith. So that's concerning the general approach of the ulama of regarding hadith mu'allaka in Sahih al-Bukhari. So regarding concerning the next matter, so we end concerning the matter regarding hadith mu'allaka in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. And we said that Imam Bukhari, more of a discussion, because there are many more hadith mentioned in his book compared to that of Imam Muslim. Only just around 12 hadith in Sahih Muslim that are easily explained away and clarified, but Bukhari a little more detail. And because of this, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, that he took on the task of collecting all those hadith in Bukhari that are somewhat that are criticized concerning mu'allaka, and he wrote a book specifically on that topic, related to that topic in and also and related to that topic in Sahih Bukhari, and that book is called Taghliq At-Taliq. Taghliq At-Taliq by Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, and that book is in print in about 4 to 5 volumes. So that book is in print by Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah as a part of his service of Sahih Bukhari. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, that he has a service, a lot of work related to Sahih Bukhari. Of that, he have a detailed explanation of Sahih Bukhari. Also of that, he has like a book that they said Hadi Asari, which is the Muqaddim of Fathul Bari, the explanation of Sahih Bukhari, where he can somewhat discuss all the hadiths that are been criticized by in Sahih Bukhari. And also he have another book specifically that is called Taghliq At-Taliq, that discuss concerning again some of the hadith that are criticized in Bukhari. And also he has about the Taliq, he mentioned there's about he has about 3 books on 3 different levels on that same topic. So he has about 3 books, 2 other books on that same topic regarding, that is related to Taghliq At-Taliq. So that's concerning the efforts of the ulama pertaining to this particular matter. And you find that other ulama somewhat have done some small efforts concerning some of the hadith of Sahih Muslim that are somewhat discussed. Some of the hadith are discussed, and you find concern that you have Sheikh Ali Hassan rahimahullah ta'ala, that you have these I've done some checking or tahqiq of some of those rasail that are small rasail that relates to some of the hadiths that are criticized specifically in Sahih Muslim regarding so we have some discussion regarding some of the few hadith, and Sheikh Ali Hassan have done some work or checked some work relating to that topic that are important material on those books. So that's concerning hadith that we mentioned, the author rahimahullah mentioned concerning al-mu'allaq. Then we'll go now to the next hadith, which is hadith at-tadlis. Hadith قال mu'an'ana. Hadith mu'an'ana, which is the next type of hadith he mentioned regarding of that no of hadith, which is mu'an'ana, which is huwa ma أوتي فيه بصيغة عن فلان and فلان وهو متصل إن لم يكن تدليس وأمكن اللقاء. So that's concerning what he described concerning that hadith, the next hadith with the hadith al-mu'an'ana, hadith mu'an'ana, which he described concerning هو ما أوتي فيه بصيغة أن, with the hadith that have been mentioned by way of the narrator saying أن فلان. So the hadith with a person have used the wording on fulan. That they mention وهو متصل, then he said that it is something which is giving the hukum هو متصل, it is considered to be a complete in لم يكن تدليس, if it is considered to be متصل, if the narrator is not said to be described as having tadlis, deception, then they mention وأمكن اللقاء, and there's a possibility of them meeting. So an-ana is that next type of hadith that are discussed between the ulama regarding so inshallah ta'ala we'll discuss again concerning one, the definition of mu'an'ana, give some more clarity to what the author mentioned, and also discuss concerning books and the hukum regarding mu'an'ana, and a few topics, a few matters relating to that topic. So the first concerning ta'rif hadith mu'an'ana, as mentioned by the author rahimahullah, that huwa ما روي بصيغة الأن. So the hadith that have been narrated by the narrator by saying عن فلان. So عن فلان. So he didn't say سمعت or حدثنا or أخبرنا. So hadith, when it is narrated, you find that one. So the hadith here in mu'an'ana, where the person used the word عن فلان, عن فلان, from such person. So from fulan upon fulan. So the word anhana is the word we said an fulan, from someone. So regarding concerning, so this can somewhat indicate that he didn't give the perception that he did not hear the hadith directly from that person. He did not hear the hadith directly from the person, so he used the word an. So you find that the ulama rahimahullah, in looking concerning a hadith as to how they are narrated, that one, you have what we call sigatul sama', where a person actually narrate a hadith in a way that indicate that he heard the hadith directly, or he heard the hadith directly, and that by saying sami'tu, akhbarana, or adathana. So when a person use these type of terminology, these type of terms, sami'tu, I heard, or akhbarana, or it was related to us, narrated to us, or we were informed, or haddathana, it was mentioned to us, then it indicates that the person was that directly heard the hadith from a sheikh. Or, so that's concerning the first way of narrating hadith, by way of clearly indicating that the hadith was heard directly. So I use certain type of terminology for that to indicate this. The next type that he mentioned, which is that indicates concerning mu'an'ana, that indicate that is ihtimal, indicate that he could or he could not have heard the hadith. And that's when he used the word an. So the word an indicate that maybe he heard the hadith or did he hear the hadith. So it is not clear that he did, and it's not clear that he didn't, but it needs to be investigated more thoroughly. And then there's a third way regarding hadith, where can someone indicate the person did not hear the hadith. When the person mentioned ukhbar, so the person the person going to hukiya, the hadith was narrated, was mentioned, or what was so in using those type of wording that may indicate that he did not hear the hadith. So you have three ways directly indicate that the person heard, those that indicate that he did not hear, and those that is in between. It may have heard the hadith or he may not have heard the hadith. Regarding that's concerning a sigat al-ada, sigat al-ada, ways of the person mentioned the hadith. So regarding that matter, that the hukum regarding hadith al-mu'annan, hadith al-mu'annan. So the hukum of hadith al-mu'annan, that the ulama can somewhat that mention that the author here mentioned that there are certain criteria that they have put aside regarding concerns in the matter regarding hadith al-mu'annan. There's a kind of somewhat tafsil more explanation, an explanation regarding when that hadith is said to be acceptable and when it is not said to be acceptable. So it's not per se and then it's completely dismissed. No, it is completely accepted. Is that there's factors to be considered and conditions to be looked into to fulfill. So they mentioned regarding concern the matter, they mentioned that one is look concerning that one of those factors is the narrator who uses the term an fulan. To look that person, see, is this narrator, is he known for tadlis? Is known. So the first thing concerning that, and yakuna rawi mudallis, that the wari is that narrator is known for tadlis, for andalas al-hadith, that we'll discuss and explain further concerning tadlis. So regarding concern a person no concern, tadlis is not the person not being straightforward. He's not being straightforward. So use the word tadlis here in a loose way until we explain further to mean that he's concerning that not being straightforward. So regarding concerning hadith who is known to be al-mudallis, then if that person is known for this, then the person one look into regarding that ulama of place concerning those individual who are said to be of mudallis, who does this form of tadlis, that they have them in different categories. They have them in tabaqat, different degrees. So those you find, so of those degrees, you find that some are known to be people who may be accused of tadlis, but they do it nadir, really it is done. So a person who's known that he may do it rarely, it is done, but is known to be thicker, then his hadith is acceptable. So if you use the word an, because the person who really does it, then in this case, his hadith is acceptable, and he does not, hadith is acceptable in this regard. Another person who's known that he only narrates, is said to be a person who does tadlis, but is known to only narrate on people who are known to be thiqat. So the person is said to be a mudallis to some degree, but this person is known only to narrate on people who are said to be thiqat. Then his hadith is acceptable. So in certain cases, depending on the person's degree of tadlis, then you find a person that is known to be a mudallis, but he does, but himself is criticized for other reasons other than this. So that person hadith is dismissed. And a person who is known to be a mudallis and he does tadlis mainly on people who are said to be du'afa and people who are majahil. People are not known, unknown. So also his hadith is dismissed. His hadith is also dismissed. So as we discuss more concerning tadlis, when we discuss that discussion further. But as the out is related to mu'an'ana. And also we find that, so that's concerning that case. So is the person level of tadlis, it may depend on whether his hadith is accepted or not. Then we have a next case regarding concerning a person who is said to be, who's not known for tadlis. A person is not known for tadlis. For that person, that his situation fall into three situations. So as the author kind of mentioned in the book concerning that with concerning mu'anhana, وهو متصل إن لم يكن tadlis. So the person is not known to be a mudallis, but they will say there's some explanation regarding that level. And the second is amkan al-liqa. So you have a next matter concern to look into regarding hadith mu'anhana, regarding is that narrator, did he actually met his sheikh? Amkan al-liqa. So liqa is that both of them were able to meet each other. So the ulama rahimahullah regarding hadith al-mu'anhana, they have two wordings that are crucial. Mu'asira wal-liqa. Mu'asira mean that both individual, they were at the same time period, but they did not meet, but they were in the same time period. They live at the same time, around the same time, but both did not actually meet. So one live in one city in Baghdad and the other live in Medina, but they're in the same time period. So that is said to be mu'asira. They were contemporaries. But it's not known that they actually met because of the distance of their cities are where they were living. They live far apart. The next thing they look at concerning al-liqa, that the author mentioned liqa, which is liqa is where both people actually met. There's a possibility that they actually met. So both were known to be in the same city. So it is taken as they met to some degree, or that they actually did meet, but maybe for a short period of time. But they actually did meet, and he heard from him. So is looking concerning, was there liqa between both? So that's concerning. So that goes back. So that's also another factor regarding that if both were known that they met and heard from each other even once, then that person hadith becomes acceptable. The second scenario is that that person that they have mu'asira, the person would have they were at the same time, but it is known that they did not meet. So that hadith is not acceptable, is dismissed. So both individuals at the same time, they are contemporaries, is known that they did not meet. So in that case, that hadith of is mu'an'ana, it is dismissed, not acceptable. And then you have another situation regarding that mu'an'ana, where both were mu'asir, and could they meet? Possibly they could have met, but it's not confirmed that they met. They were apart, same close, the cities were close, or they're both in the same city, but it is not known that they actually met. But there's a possibility that they could have met. So in that case, you find a difference between the ulama. In that scenario, that if they are possibly they were of contemporaries, then you find that Imam Muslim rahimahullah stipulated that Imam Muslim rahimahullah that he more inclined to the view that if they are mu'asira, that they were contemporaries, then that's sufficient. The fact that they were contemporaries at the same time, then that's sufficient to say that their mu'an'ana is acceptable. And Imam Bukhari rahimahullah and Ali Madini, that they all that's not the case. That both must meet each other. Both must meet each other. What they call liqa must have occurred between both for them to at least once to accept is mu'an'ana. But by just mere mu'asira being contemporaries of the same time period, that's not sufficient for them, for Bukhari and others of the ulama, and that's where the discussion between the ulama it lies. That's where the discussion lies. It regarding is mu'asira sufficient or not. Some stipulate that mu'asira is sufficient, and some mention that it's not sufficient. Rather, the both must have liqa, must have met each other at least once for their mu'an'ana to be deemed to be acceptable. And that's where the discussion it lies. So you find that books have been written, and especially concerning of contemporaries regarding going into that matter concerning is mu'asara or mu'asara sufficient or not. You find that books have been written on that topic, and of those important books that are written, a book written by, you have a book that is written concerning a Sunan Abyan, that is written by Ibn Rushayd, Sunan al-Abyan by Ibn Rushayd, that kind of somewhat cover this topic, and also a book of contemporary which is by Mawqif Imamain, Bukhari wa Muslim, min ishtirat al-liqa al-luqya والسماء في السند معنعنة بين متآثرين, and that book is written by a Sheikh al-Professor Dr. Khalid ibn Mansour Daris, and this Sheikh Khalid ibn Mansour Daris, that he have several books concerning Ilm al-Hadith, and they are very good. So his books concerning Hadith, that he has a book that is in 4 or now in multiple volumes, only about that discuss concerning Hadith al-Hasan only. And that's about 4 to 5 volumes. So his books generally are very good research material regarding ulum al-hadith. So that's concerning that discussion regarding mu'an'ana. So based upon the length and the depth of these two discussions regarding hadith al-mu'allaka and hadith mu'an'ana, then we can somewhat will end our topic, our discussion, our lesson for today on those two topics, seeing the length and the depth of those two topics, and may take a little time for the person to grasp what has been said. So inshallah ta'ala we'll end here. وبالله تعالى توفيق وهذا السبيل. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.